I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost, your weekly look at the world of business and finance here on Al Jazeera. This week, an outlook revised to negative. With those words from Standard & Poor's, the markets tumbled and people started wondering, could the United States end up in more trouble than it already is? Also, a year after America's worst oil spill devastated the Gulf Coast, we go back to see the cost still being counted there. And we speak to the boss of Volvo at the Shanghai Motor Show to find out what life is like for the Swedish company under Chinese ownership. So it was effectively a shot across the bow, a warning to the United States. Get your house in order and do it now. And it came from the credit rating agency Standard & Poor's, which along with Moody's and Fitch really sets the global tone for fiscal health. Now, it didn't downgrade the US. In official credit speak, its rating is still AAA/A-1+, which probably won't mean much to you, in which case this is the bit to take note of, the outlook which changed from stable, which everyone likes, to the far less attractive negative. Now, it doesn't mean the sky's falling in and the US is about to default on its debts, but it does mean there's enough doubt over what the US is actually doing about its debts for S&P and by extension the markets to be worried. Here's the numbers to back it all up. The US budget deficit for this year is projected to rise by as much as $1.65 trillion, or about 10% of GDP. Overall, US debt stands at $14.2 trillion, a number only expected to rise as costs surge for healthcare and retirement programs. All worrying stuff. Even America's largest debt holder, with $1.15 trillion worth, that's China, warned the US to take responsible measures to protect its interests. The bottom line is that US government bonds have always been seen as safe. Now, not so much. Now, this week we're fortunate to have the head of S&P's Sovereign Ratings Committee join us on the show, and we're going to bring him into the conversation in a moment. Before that, I've got one more element to show you on the iPad here. It is a global debt clock from The Economist. Some may look at it as something of a doomsday clock, seeing as every 3 seconds the global government debt is increasing by around $300,000. And that's what we know from actual data from 2010. I'm going to change it here to 2011. First of all, you see the number jumps up to about 41 trillion, but it starts ticking over at about $400,000 every 3 seconds. That tells you right there why sovereign debt is such a big issue and why the likes of Greece, Ireland and Portugal heading to the IMF for a bailout was so significant, and why any negative news about the US needs to be thoroughly examined. So let's do that right now with John Chambers joining us from New York. He is the head of Standard & Poor's Sovereign Ratings Committee. John, good to have you with us. Am I right in saying that your decision to change the outlook on the US is based on politics? There's so much squabbling between Democrats and Republicans over the path to take, so it's a political decision rather than an economic one.
Well, Kamal, I think that there's two aspects to the answer, and one is a political judgment. We do observe a political gridlock here in the United States over the budget negotiations, and we think that that political gridlock will result in delays in an agreement being reached and a dilution of the goals that have been set out both by the Obama administration and the congressional Republican leadership. But at the heart of the issue, of course, is a fiscal problem in that the deficits of the U.S. Are quite high now. We think that those can be managed in the short term, but the medium-term and long-term fiscal trajectory of the United States for us could get to a point where it would no longer be consistent with the AAA rating and thus our negative outlook.
But does that mean, if we put the squabbling aside, that you actually like the ideas you've heard? You know, Barack Obama wants to cut the deficit by $4 trillion over 12 years. Republicans almost the same amount over 10 years, I think. Would those be sufficient measures if they were to be passed?
If those measures were enacted in a timely manner and if they were realized, I think that would stabilize the debt to GDP ratio, which would probably enable us to stabilize the rating, yes.
Okay, but what's your confidence really like, though?
Well, a negative outlook indicates that there's at least a 1 in 3 chance that the rating could go down. And empirically, if you look at our entire universe of sovereign ratings since we started assigning outlooks, once you get a negative outlook, 56% of those have ultimately gone down.
So much has been made, John, about austerity measures across the Atlantic, Europe. Does the US maybe even have to take a leaf out of Europe's book? I know these are unpopular measures. You know, what's happening in the UK, what happened in Greece and Portugal, it's unpopular stuff. But arguably, it may be what's needed in the long term, and maybe the US should look there.
Well, I think that the United States is different in one regard, and that is that its revenues to GDP are markedly lower than all of the continental European nations, and it's lower too than the UK. And so there is some effort that the U.S. can make on the revenue side that still wouldn't crowd out the private sector.
So the US is almost a special case then, and I think I got this from some of your publications, that the diversity of its economy, even the fact that it is still the world's reserve currency and is likely to stay that way, those factors perhaps make it more of a unique case, let's say that.
Well, that's a separate issue, but it's a valid issue. The dollar is the key international reserve currency. It gets that because of the credibility of its monetary policy, because the financial system is at least as good as those of the other major currency blocks, and because of the size and the depth and the liquidity of its capital markets. And we don't see that changing.
John, your job is, obviously you're a ratings agency, you rate, you flag up what you believe are warning signs for the markets. Do you consider the ramifications when you make these decisions? I mean, taking a decision to change an outlook to negative, knowing what the immediate effect can be. In this case, for example, with the US, we saw the markets drop very quickly. Internationally, it's major news for anyone who hears the US is on a negative outlook. It's a weighty decision for you to make.
Well, you know, our responsibility are to investors, and we try to hold the mirror up to nature. We're just trying to give our best estimate on, what the credit conditions are, and we're trying to be an honest, independent voice in doing that.
Yeah, but can you end up being stuck in a sort of chicken and egg scenario, if I can call it that? You make a downgrade or you change an outlook, and thus you cause jitters in the market, but if you don't flag that up, you're not doing your job. And you obviously have to flag these things up if you see fit.
I think that if you've got lots of opinions in the market giving their best analyses, that's the best way to enable prices to adjust and to have smooth transitions in markets. I think that if you try to suppress information, that it's like a pressure building up on a pot, and then you can have bigger problems. Well, we take our job very seriously. We publish all of our transition and default data, and I think our track record speaks for itself. Over a 15-year horizon, we've never had any defaults from AAA, AA, or single A in the sovereign rating space since 1975. We publish our methodology, how we come to our ratings. The methodology centers on political factors, income and economic structure, fiscal, monetary, external factors. And if people read our methodology and they think that it's flawed, then they can come to their own conclusions.
All right, John Chambers from Standard & Poor's in New York talking US debt with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carmel.
Now, the auto industry is finding its feet again, particularly in China. Later in this program, we're off to the Chinese auto show in Shanghai to speak to the CEO of that most Chinese of companies, Volvo. Right now, though, we want to reflect on 1 year since the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. It killed 11 workers, it triggered the worst oil spill in US history and turned the corporate name of one BP into mud. Again, let's start with the numbers for some perspective. Almost 5 million barrels of oil spewed into the Gulf of Mexico over 87 days. It resulted in $3.8 billion in claims against BP, which have been approved. BP, though, has never taken the blame fully. It says the rig owner Transocean was negligent and is suing it for at least $40 billion. Transocean, though, denies those accusations. As far as the victims go, there are two sides to this story. Obviously, fishing, tourism, the environment, they all took a huge, unjustified hit. But don't forget how important oil is to the region economically. It is the lifeblood, and restrictions on drilling are still in place and still hurting. John Terrett has this report from the industry's heart in Port Fourchon.
They say oil and water don't mix, but they do at Port Fourchon. This sprawling terminal at Louisiana's southernmost tip is a hub for servicing the giant deep-water oil rigs.
Port Fourchon is a nervous place, and the companies, a lot of them headquartered in Houston or New Orleans, are nervous because they don't know what's happening to this core constituency, this deep-water drilling capability.
These vessels are between $5 and $100 million to build. Their operating costs can hit $100,000 a day. But they're tied up because many of the deep water drill rigs aren't working. 7 of the more than 30 large rigs in the Gulf of Mexico this time last year have been moved to Africa, South America and even Greenland. Some deep water drilling is resuming at previous sites. A couple of new ones are expected to start soon too, but it's nowhere near the level of activity seen before the disaster. This is like a graveyard for oil rigs. There are 6 of them here, much smaller than the Deepwater Horizon that exploded a year ago. But because there's now no new drilling taking place, you see equipment just like this idled throughout the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Louisiana. That means firms that service the oil industry have less work. So what does she do?
She works in a bookkeeping department.
Johnny Bro joined his present firm on April the 19th last year, one day before the Deepwater Horizon exploded. Unlike some of his colleagues, he says he can't follow the work overseas.
I'm from here. I don't want to go nowhere else and work.
Is that what all the guys think?
A lot of them. But I mean, a lot of them don't have no choice because the companies are leaving. So they have to if they want to continue working.
New deepwater permits are being issued again, but the drilling operations take time to set up and workers here are counting the days.
How can we get more traction than we had?
Local environmentalists question whether the rules that govern deepwater drilling have been sufficiently tightened.
I understand that there are people who are hurting right now, and we are sympathetic to the job losses that have happened in places like Port Fourchon, but we also know if we do not learn the lessons right now, if we do not put the best possible safety regulations out there, we'll never get them put in place.
Johnny Bro and others like him in Port Fourchon welcome tougher safety regulations, but their main concern is simply getting back to work.
There's one small bird up here.
At Grand Isle's migrating bird celebration, they're tallying species as they return from South America.
The birding is fabulous here, and there's migratory birds coming through and you can come down and see them. That's not to underestimate the kind of damage that the spill has done to the marine ecosystem.
They're getting the birds. Now all that Grand Isle needs is fishing tourism to come back as well. But there are fears that oil and the dispersant used to break it up are still causing problems here.
And right now, Grand Isle is like a big experimental lab. We don't know what the species are going to be a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. They do daily testing of the water. They check everything. They're on the beach constantly looking for tar balls and oil. And so the effects of this aren't going to be known probably for a couple of years.
That may be too late for people like Michelle and her husband, who sank their life savings into a business here, hoping to supplement their retirement.
Everything we came here to do is gone. We can't trust that the fishing is going to come back. We can't trust that the food is safe. We know what we're being told, but we don't know what to believe.
From Grand Isle's beach, oil platforms dominate the horizon. It's funny being back after a year. Gone are the hordes of BP cleanup workers in their little tents. Gone are the acres of boom stopping the oil from coming ashore. Gone are the keep out notices, replaced today anyway by a number of families enjoying the clean beach.
Further south to Brazil now, an emerging economy which we talked about last week, and a move to not only bring in imports and investments but people. Think of it in sporting terms: the Football World Cup in 2014, the Olympic Games 2016. What we're seeing is many of the country's star footballers coming back to Brazil because, quite simply, the opportunities are finally there. More with Gabriel Elizondo in Sao Paulo.
They pack a stadium, but there isn't even a game today. Brazilian football fans are here for a homecoming. A welcome back to Brazil party for Ronaldinho Gaúcho. 45,000 fans packed Morumbi Stadium simply to cheer on Luis Fabiano's return to Sao Paulo Football Club. He scored 3 goals in the last World Cup and left Sevilla to come back to Brazil. With Brazil's economy now flourishing and the country preparing to host the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Olympics, it's simply become cool again to play for Brazil's club teams.
Today was like a dream to come back to Brazil and put on the jersey of Sao Paulo.
Everyone, if they have the opportunity, wants to play in a great city, earn a lot of money, and play in the most important championships. It's awesome. Today, I see Brazil has all those possibilities, so that is why I wanted to come back.
In stadiums all over, we're seeing scenes like this, fans welcoming back football stars that are returning to Brazil. It says a lot about the state of Brazilian football, but maybe even more so, it speaks to the state of Brazil itself.
As much of Europe struggles to find its way out of a global economic downturn, Brazil's economy is hotter than ever, and that has spilled over to the sport that the country is best known for.
It is a great moment in Brazilian football all over again, and it is a sign of the economic times we have today that we can bring players back, based on the strength of our economy, without a doubt. Also, it is obvious that the World Cup and the Olympic Games in Brazil will put Brazil back in the spotlight, and without a doubt, the star football players want to be close to the action.
For fans, the benefit is not having to watch their star players on TV while they play in Europe. More often than not, they now can head right around the corner to the local stadium.
Now, man-made islands in the Middle East. They are nothing new. Think about Dubai, the Palm, the world. Big news despite their economic issues. Got the Pearl just up the road from us here in Qatar. How about one off the coast of Gaza, maybe? Bernard Smith has more on that $10 billion project.
Gaza's Mediterranean shoreline is one of the few things that makes life bearable here for people locked into this strip of land by Israel's blockade. But the view here could change dramatically and further isolate Gaza if a serious Israeli plan for a 5 to 8 kilometre square man-made island off the coast actually gets off the ground.
Technically, yes, can be done, but it depends on the area. We need on the environment. We need many socio-environment studies. The radius of effect will be much larger than 5 kilometers.
Rising up out of the Med, the internationally controlled island would cost $10 billion, have an airport, a seaport, hotels and a 5-kilometre bridge to Gaza. The idea is a fantasy, says a Palestinian Authority spokesman, but Israel's transport ministry means business.
It will give the Palestinians more land even, and will give them prosperity, supply employs for around 100,000 people to build it and practice it and operate it. And his thought is that if these people will deal with the economy, with the prosperity, they won't think about terror.
There is a simpler, cheaper and easier solution to building an island in the middle of the Mediterranean. This was the runway at Gaza International Airport before Israel blew it up. Now, Israel could allow the airport to be rebuilt, but that's extremely unlikely. Unlikely because Israel sees the airport as a security threat. By moving Gaza's entries and exits offshore, Israel could completely seal the land border and airspace, avoiding any contact with the territory.
Now, in the auto industry, there's been a bit of a diary clash. Both New York and Shanghai are holding their auto shows at the same time. Guess where most of the world's chief executives went, though? China, of course. Why? It's simple. 17.2 million vehicles sold last year in China, 50% more than the United States. 23 million new vehicles expected on the roads by 2015. And with only 5% of Chinese people actually owning a car, there is plenty of upside. As such, the likes of Ford, GM and Volkswagen are all targeting new cars specifically at the Chinese market. We're going to zero in on Volvo, though, which last year was taken over by Zhejiang Geely in a $1.8 billion deal with previous owner Ford. At the time, Geely was saying about $900 million would be spent on expanding production and turning around the loss-making Swedish brand. Earlier this week, I spoke to the CEO of Volvo, Stefan Jacobi, from the Shanghai Auto Show. I began by asking what life was like under Chinese ownership and how Volvo was faring.
Well, we have unveiled here at the Shanghai Motor Show a first concept car, which is showing and giving a glimpse how Volvo cars will look like in the future. We are working on our own technical platform and architecture, which will deliver us these kind of dimensions which you see here in the car behind us. And it will increase our competitiveness in the future. We have very ambitious plans globally. We want to more than double our volume over the next 10 years. And we want to do this with excellent technology, strengthening our values of safety and environment, and bringing also the emotions with Volvos into the markets.
Is the market still ripe to have that kind of increase in sales and numbers? The car industry no doubt got hit hard by the downturn, and it was only the things like scrappage schemes which really helped keep it going.
We had a very good recovery already last year, and we are continue to grow also in the first quarter of 2011. Volvo Cars has sold in the first 3 months more than 106,000 vehicles. This is a good growth of more than 16%. The growing markets are not only here in China, but also a good recovery in the United States and a strong growth in Europe. And that gives us the confidence that the markets are coming back.
Let's focus then on China, seeing as you are there in Shanghai, and the tie-up or the ownership of Volvo by Zhejiang Geely. What has it meant for the company? What have you been able to do? What more have you been able to do, I guess, under that ownership?
Well, first of all, there's not a significant difference in ownership, whether this is a Chinese, American or European ownership. Shareholders have their expectations, they set the objectives, and I'm very glad that we have laid out a strategy for Volvo Cars which guarantees that Volvo will invest into future technology and will grow. But of course, the Chinese ownership offers us additional opportunities in our second home market here in China. Things are easier here for us than maybe for some of our competitors, and that actually will boost our plans here in China. We are investing in an industrial footprint here in China. We will open our first own plant in 2013 in Chengdu, and we plan to sell by 2015 200 Volvo cars here in the very, very prospering Chinese market.
Can you tell us a little bit about Zhejiang Geely, the company which owns Volvo? I'm just interested because it's, as I know, only a 13-year-old company, still quite a new company, but has done some major things, including owning one of the, the world's very famous car brands.
Yeah, this is indeed amazing. It shows the entrepreneurship of the owner, Li Shifu. He is an entrepreneur, he is a visionary, and I like his flexibility, I like his speed, and this is good for Volvo as well. We are feeling very confident. Li Shifu is running both brands independently from each other. That guarantees that Volvo remains Volvo, and we can even continue with our strength in our product line.
Forgive me if you have to repeat yourself here, but are you actually planning to build Volvos in China? I'm just wondering about the impact on other production plants elsewhere.
We have announced this already. We are starting we produce already now in a joint venture with Ford from our former ownership, and we will then shift in 2013 this production also to our new plant in Chengdu, where we also will produce new vehicles in the Volvo lineup.
Just some broader questions about the company. The plan was to spend, and this is a lot of money, $900 million on returning Volvo to profitability. Was that enough money to get that job done, and what sort of time frame to get that job done?
We have announced that we will invest in the next 5 years, especially into products, but also in our industrial footprint, $11 billion. This will guarantee that we are doing the right things, that we are investing in new products, and also increasing our industrial footprint then with plants here in China.
A final thought from you then on the industry as a whole. As I said earlier, it did take a big hit. Is it going to return to the heights that we saw before? And what are the most important lessons to have learned from those downturn days?
Well, I think we have to learn to be a little bit more prepared to economic up and downs. We also need to understand that the markets are getting much more volatile. We cannot, they are not predictable as they maybe have been in the past. And that gives a relatively small company like Volvo Cars a good opportunity. We cannot compete with our competitors maybe in respect of size, but we can compete with them in respect of flexibility and speed. And I think that will be in the future very important in order to react properly for market volatilities.
Stefan Jacobi, the CEO of Volvo, joining us from Shanghai. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's about it for this week. Don't forget Counting the Cost online. You can get to our corner of the world via the main page at aljazeera.net/English. You hit the business tab at the top. There is a link from there to the Counting the Cost page. You can watch episodes in full there at your convenience. And feel free to get in touch if you like. @KamalAJE is where you find me on Twitter. I post regular updates on the show there. Keep you right up to date with what's happening. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Costs. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.